Hi everyone, welcome to the Live Better Connected podcast. Now, for many of you, you will know undoubtedly there has been an election called, and I'm doing something a little special. I've got a little mini series here where I'm inviting people to the podcast who are both working in the infrastructure world, but also have been very much involved in government, both within the civil service or within the political parties. And I'm delighted today to have Tom Kelly, who is a strategic infrastructure advisor. You say you're a strategic advisor, especially on infrastructure. Now, you've got quite a history in the infrastructure world. Would you mind just quickly giving us a little bit of a highlight?
Well, I started my career in the BBC, and then I moved for 9 years into government. As you may hear, I'm from Northern Ireland, and I started in the Northern Ireland office and then moved into Downing Street, where I was the Prime Minister's spokesman for 6 years. After that, I thought I would go for an easy life, so I went into Heathrow to run the campaign for the third runway, and then into Network Rail, and then into HS2. So an easy life in infrastructure.
I would never say that that's an easy life, and we'll come on to HS2. But for transparency purposes, just to say that myself and Tom have worked with each other, both in HS2 and in and around, in my own sort of background, working sort of on aviation as well. Now, the key sort of element I've got today is we've had over the last government, and we're obviously looking to a new government, whatever it may be, but we've had some, as we say, HS2 being one of the big projects there, third runway being another one, and obviously I'm looking at it from 5G and the rollout of that new technology. But equally, what I'd be fascinated to know is as we're going into this period, we are looking, there's very much talk about the potential for change. We've had one government where infrastructure has not necessarily been consistent. We've had HS2 with 2 phases, then phase 2 has been cancelled. We've had a third runway, which was on the cards. That's now still locked in the doldrums. And from a 5G perspective, we're talking about needing a huge amount of infrastructure, and there's about an infrastructure gap of around 25 billion. So my first question is really, from your point of view, what is needed as we go forward into a new election and potentially a new government?
It may seem a strange comparison, but I worked for 9 years on the Northern Ireland peace process. And what actually made that succeed in relative terms was clarity of purpose, consistency in the way in which we address the issue, and certainty about the direction in which we're going. When I look back at my experience both at Heathrow and at HS2, those 3 things were missing. We weren't clear in either case about what the purpose, if you like, beyond the immediate project it had in the national economy. And you need that. Once you are clear about that, you then need consistency in driving towards that objective, and you need the certainty that you are going to finish the project. And those 3 things have been lacking in our approach to infrastructure, whether it is aviation, whether it is the railways, whether it is mobile technology. We need clarity, consistency, and certainty. And if I had one plea to whoever forms the next government, it is to have those 3 elements, if you like, in our approach to infrastructure.
And from a business perspective, and say I'm representing here Mobile UK, the 4 mobile operators, that certainty of clarity is hugely important on our side. One of the issues we have is an investment environment which is very challenging. And if we have sort of a short-termist looking government, that makes it very difficult to drive that investment into the UK. So looking at the political parties at the moment, where would you say we are on that sort of, as we look at election manifestos, do we have that clarity?
Well, we don't. What we have is a row over tax. And in my view, that is secondary, because if we are going to invest in public services, if we are going to get growth in the UK, which has been lacking for well over a decade, then we need investment, as you say. To get investment, you need that clarity, you need that consistency, you need that certainty. And for Labour in particular, that means joining up the dots between its aspirations for the national economy and how it's going to deliver it in particular. We've seen various ideas they have put forward, such as merging the Infrastructure Projects Authority and the National Infrastructure Commission into the National Infrastructure and Service Transformation Authority, a I'd be interested to see if that name survives. But they've got the right idea. But the key is in the detail. Would that authority be simply able to guide projects, or would it have statutory authority? You have to, in my view, give it statutory authority, because otherwise the problem with the National Infrastructure Commission is it produces lots of very good reports, but they're gathering dust on a shelf. They're not reflected in detailed policy.
And I think we'd reflect that in Mobile UK. Sort of, again, we've looked at the National Infrastructure Commission, and their reports have been, we would say very favourable. They look at that sort of long-term view. But if we haven't got a government that takes on that long-term thinking, we get to that sort of flip-flop short-termism which we have seen. So, I mean, one of the things that Labour has done, you mentioned the detail. They've set up the British Infrastructure Council. They've brought some key experts around the table. And I imagine there's more detail that we don't know about.
I don't know is the honest answer, and that's part of the problem. No government, the saying used to be you campaign in poetry and you govern in prose. So, I'm slightly sort of, despite my best instincts, I'm slightly understanding of why Labour don't want to put more detail on that at this stage. But when they get into government, if they get into government, they are going to have to think very quickly on their feet. And above all, they're going to have to join up the dots. Join up the dots across Whitehall. Join up the dots between industry as a whole and what they want to achieve. Now, that means I think the industry has to be prepared to play its part. And just as government has to break down the silos, so the various infrastructure providers, whether it is water utilities, whether it's airports, whether it's mobile, have to be prepared to cooperate better across their silos, as well as asking government to do the same.
And in terms of that cooperation, because you mentioned sort of the water industry, the energy industry, we've got a huge move towards decarbonisation. But if we look at the investment needed, I think it's around £96 billion in the water industry by 2030. It's £50 billion per year up to 2030 in the energy industry. And as I mentioned already, we have a 25 billion investment gap as well. What sort of, you mentioned bringing them together. How would you say that could happen? I mean, a lot of it, you mentioned the silos within the peace process. In some ways, are we getting the industries to work together?
Well, I think, the British Infrastructure Council is a starting point, but it's only a starting point. The problem with the National Infrastructure Commission and the Infrastructure Projects Authority is that they operated at different ends of the spectrum. National Infrastructure Commission operated at the big picture end. Infrastructure Project Authority operated at the more detailed end. You have to zigzag between the two more. And that means you have to constantly ask at a big picture level, how do the various investments that are needed fit together? And at a detailed level, how do you get the synergies that you can at an implementation level? Too often, we spend money duplicating effort, which then actually, it becomes right. You have to choose between mobile technology investment and, say, railway investment. What's the outcome you're trying to achieve? How do you work better to achieve that outcome more efficiently?
So bringing those two together sounds like, as you say, a good first starting point. It's just making sure that happens.
Making sure it happens, but also making sure that we keep the eye on the outcomes that we're trying to achieve for the country and keep asking, are the various investments leading to that outcome? And then developing, I call it a modular approach to infrastructure, whereby you get the big picture and then you see how the various elements contribute to that big picture. Because, of course, the government's going to have to prioritise. It's what does it choose to prioritise and how does that contribute to the big picture?
And having been, as you said, sort of in your past, you were the spokesperson for Tony Blair's government. Do you have any advice for the person who may be sitting in that role now as we get a new government coming in? What should be their first steps? How should they reach out to industry, as you suggested?
I think I used to always say that, the 6 years I did lobby twice a day, what people saw was me, if you like, selling a message to the lobby each day. What they didn't see was me going back into Downing Street and saying, this worked, that doesn't work. You need to rethink the policy, not just the line. You need to rethink the policy if it's going to fit reality. Politics and policy are about matching rhetoric and reality. That's what the government has to do. We've had a lot of rhetoric during the past 10 years. We haven't matched rhetoric with reality on a consistent basis.
And that rhetoric point, I think, is really important because, as you say, we've heard a lot of positive things, but actually what happens out on the ground impacts those companies and the industries that are doing it.
And that then feeds into cost, because the supply chain adds a risk premium if it's not certain that it's going to get the chance to deliver what's been asked to deliver. The way to get costs is to add certainty.
And that's a really interesting point, because the UK has again, well, our time at HS2, but equally now in the mobile world and aviation. When we come to planning, it's become an extremely expensive place to build, and part of that is because of the sort of the policy and the regulations and the length of time and the delays that happen. I mean, do you have any views on that?
Yes, I think planning is key, and I think Labour are making the right signs on planning, but again, they have to implement. But I think they also need to recognise that if you are a contractor in the UK, at the back of your mind is, well, is this project actually going to happen? Or am I going to have invested in a lot of skills and materials and suddenly find the project's cancelled? So you build in extra cost. That's partly why we're more expensive to build things than they are in Europe. We've got to connect up the dots. I keep saying it, join up the dots between the barriers that we face, such as planning, and the additional costs that we face, such as the uncertainty that we've now created around projects.
And how do you think a new government can go about that? Because I think the UK's sort of where it stands in the world on building major infrastructure projects or working with industries to build those projects has taken a hit. It's from our industry as well. We are constantly saying we want to be world class in digital connectivity. Yet to do that, we need to drive that investment in. We need to be seen as somewhere, as you can say, you can get a return on investment. But we've had these big projects which have gone backwards in many ways, or we've seen cancellations, and that's impacted the UK's reputation on an infrastructure side. What do you think we can do for Labour or Liberal Democrats or Conservatives, whoever gets in, to turn that image around?
I think there's no one magic bullet. I think we're at a position where we have to incrementally restore credibility by showing examples of commitment to projects that should be delivered, and if they are delivered, will have an impact both on our global competitiveness and at a local level. But you have to do that within that incremental sort of rebuilding of credibility within a strategic framework. Labour talking about a decade of national renewal is a start to that process, but they have to fill in the picture. The way I think about it is like a children's drawing book, which has the numbers. They need to join up the dots in the numbers and actually show people what the big picture looks like. What is the Britain that they want to see in 10 years' time? What is the Britain in terms of housing? What is the Britain in terms of connectivity? What is the Britain in terms of defence? What is the Britain in terms of trade? And naively, you might have hoped this election might have been the chance to do that, but we're only at the start of it. We've only joined up number one and number two, and there's about another 100 to go. So we're only at the start of that, but that's what they need to do.
Brilliant. I think that comes back to exactly how you started this. It was getting that clarity out there, driving and getting that forward and getting that momentum. And as you say, new governments don't just start from, they need to build and get to where they need to. So, I mean, Tom, that has been fascinating. As I say, I'm really interested to learn into what happens there. But and we're going to carry on with this series, and as we go forward towards the 4th of July. So I'm going to have a couple more guests as we go forward. Thank you to Tom, and for our listeners here, please do subscribe, and we will be with the next episode very soon after this. Thank you.